it feels like society, things are spinning out of control. So you get that feeling, and we may be reaching an inflection point. But what is that inflection point? Is it there's going to be a shift to the left politically? We're seeing some of that happening in Europe, and some other countries. I mean, what do you think is going to be this inflection point, if there is one?
I don't know what it will be, but I think what I do believe is that there will be an inflection point, and I think that that is something that has been debated. I think a lot of people assume that the current trajectory that we're on is sustainable, that we kind of figured it out, and if we continue with our existing wisdom or existing investing principles, then everything's going to be fine. That's why I think the first section is the most important, because my point is there's going to have to be something that breaks the current system. And I don't think that it's going to look like the French Revolution, to be honest. I think it's important to recognize that that is what happened. I think what is more likely is that we will see some very, very out there and aggressive ideas being proposed in the political sphere, and we are beginning to see that. I think the polarization is a symptom of the problem, and I think until we start to have more reasonable, calm, and informed discussions about how unsustainable the current trajectory really is, my assumption is that we will try to correct the problem with something totally ridiculous. I think a good example of this would be what we're seeing in terms of AI. The latest proposal from AOC and from Bernie Sanders, and I can't tell if they even believe this is the right move, but the latest proposal is shut down all data centers, full moratorium, end them. And the reason that they are proposing this, and once you get into the reason why they're proposing, suddenly it starts, like, you can kind of see why they're getting into that position, is because on the other side, the policy proposal from the current administration, or from David Sachs, who's running the AI division, was we should have no regulation whatsoever. And in fact, we should prevent states from even developing the ability and make it illegal for states to come up with their own regulation for AI. So to me, that is a good example of we're not having a conversation in the middle ground about what might actually make sense. And so as soon as one side says zero regulation whatsoever, all regulation stifles innovation, blah, 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 then you see the reaction from the other side, who's going to come up with something even crazier than that. And so that's my concern, that we are going to reach some breaking point. And the way that we don't get there is if we have more thoughtful discussion in the middle, which is why I honestly appreciate having events like this where we can discuss those topics.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in the 80s and 90s, politics used to be, you tend to get extremes on the right and left, and then you get to election time and everyone would sort of gravitate to the center. So the left would moderate, the right would moderate. It just feels that that isn't happening anymore. It feels like they're just staying very far apart, and we have elections coming up in a few months here, and it is, I mean, it could be a real changing point in this country, depending on what happens there, right?
100%. And I think the people that I'm most concerned about are, how are young people going to react? I mean, you look at the way that our generation's brains have been rewired, it is genuinely quite stunning and scary. Something that we have been studying a lot recently in our research is the effect, one, that screens have had on young people's brains, which is, as I mentioned in the presentation, we're more lonely than ever, we're more anxious than ever, but also we're more stupid than ever. And we can see this in math scores, we can see this in science scores, standardized testing, literacy rates, which are all plummeting right now. And that is a result of social media and screens, and also the pandemic, which basically set back a whole generation of children at least 2 years. All of those dynamics have contributed to a brain that is highly erratic, has a difficult time grasping complex, nuanced topics, is mostly just a fleeting mind focusing on whatever grabs their attention on the social media feed to the next thing. And then what we're now seeing with AI is that AI is actually turbo boosting that train. where we're seeing an explosion in cheating among schools, where young people are using AI to write their essays, to come up with the answers for them in their homework. They're not actually doing what we call the productive struggle of trying to figure out issues and come up with solutions. And then there was another recent study which blew my mind. They looked at brain activity of students using ChatGPT, and they compared it to a control group. And what they found is that ChatGPT actually suppresses your brain activity by 55%. And they noted that that is actually lower brain usage than if you were twice above the legal alcohol limit. So you essentially have a generation of young people who are drunk drivers trying to learn during their most formative years when their brain is literally developing biologically. And so my concern, just to compound onto that, is that we're going to have a generation of young people who really cannot figure out how to meet in the middle, who are going to go on that side or that side. And until we do something to young people's minds and until we reform education in a significant way, I believe that this will probably accelerate that disturbing trend.
Right. Thinking about, and do you feel a lot of the Gen Zs are going to go out and vote in force in November? Is there an appetite?
I hope so. I mean, recent history shows that young people and Gen Z especially are very bad at voting. And the way I often put it is that as young people, we're very active with our opinions, and then we're very lazy with our actions. Like we'll talk a big game about how the world needs to change and have all these big, strong opinions. Then when it comes to actually voting and showing up and doing something about it, suddenly we forget. And we were on our phones. Oh, I didn't realize. I forgot. I didn't do the paperwork, etc. So I have a feeling that that might start to change, because I honestly think the New York election might have been a bellwether where actually for the first time ever, young people really did show up. They were very, very activated by the new mayor, and they did show up to the polls. And to me, that's encouraging that people are actually showing up and taking an interest in voting. But when you look at the long-term trend, when you look at the previous presidential election, the one before that, what we know is that Gen Z is very bad at voting. I hope that'll change.
Right. Cool. Any questions from the audience? Gentleman at the back.
First of all, it's a pleasure. I was here every week. This presentation again, it really should be communicated all across America. Very, very good.
Thank you.
Out of the 5 shifts you outlined, which one do you think, by the way, this is a group full of like extremely credible, high functioning operational technique? So which one of these 5 shifts do you think these leaders will most likely dismiss as a social issue?
But what do you think they should do about it? Which one do you think they'll probably dismiss, you think?
I would hope that no one's going to dismiss any of them, but I guess we need to take a poll of the room. I think it would probably be, I think it might be the K-shape. And I think the reason that I'm seeing some dismissal of the K-shape is because I think that when we talk about that issue, what a lot of people feel sensitive about, and it seems to be implying, is that markets and capitalism are a bad thing. That is sort of the undercurrent which often comes up when people talk about wealth inequality and income inequality. What I want to be very clear about is that I do not think that markets and capitalism are a bad thing. I think that they are the only way to create real prosperity, to get people out of poverty, which is what we've seen. I mean, the American experiment has been an exceptional one. I mean, markets, capitalism have proven themselves over and over again. They are the best form of its kind. But we should also recognize that it needs to be shepherded and guided in the right direction. And what I would hope is that conversation, those two things can be true at the same time. That markets and capitalism are a good thing, but at the same time, we can figure out ways to regulate them, to make sure that they work, and to make sure that we're actually refereeing and ensuring that the rules of the game still work for people. I think that it gets very, very fraught, because when you start talking about these topics, it starts sounding like you want to do some sort of wealth tax. You're some socialist communist who wants to seize people's assets. It's not how I feel about it at all. And I think that's why it's gotten so fraught because the conversation brings up some very sensitive feelings and emotions. It's a hot button issue. It hits the third rail, but that's exactly why we should try to figure out a way to talk about it in a way that is actually sensible and nuanced.
Arnaud? I think the K shape chart is really, really interesting. I personally love the presentation. But I was curious.
It's curious that in couple of drivers that you talked about, why this 92% productivity growth and 30% income growth, you didn't mention WTO and NAFTA. That was like in 1970s, which is the point when it started to diverge heavily. So it had a huge boost to American productivity because it's a global manufacturing, but the very little impact to the American income, which is local. Do you think that was the case? And if so, is there something that can be done about that in your what's next question?
I think that's probably one of them. And this is why and you're right that I should probably include that, because that section is me asking questions. I'm proposing potential theories as to what happened. And one thing that I do know is that economists are very, very divided on this issue. And I hope that the point about the information economy and the massive rise in the information economy and moving away from a manufacturing economy captures some of those elements, and I do think they are important. I guess my feeling is we haven't found the answer to that question. And I think that's probably something that I should emphasize more in my presentation, that like these are potential theories as to what happened in the 70s, where those two lines started to decouple. But my main thought is that we should at least acknowledge that it did happen. I feel that we're not doing that. We're not acknowledging that reality. But I take your point. It's an interesting one, and it's food for thought for me to maybe change and adjust my slides there.
Liz?
You talked about information economy. How about the disinformation economy, right? So a difference between what happened in the French Revolution and now is that the vehicles right now for disinformation at scale prevents people from unifying against one simple goal. And that's like a mechanism for those who want the status quo to keep things in place. So how do you predict, with AI going so fast and people's abilities, including our own leaders of AI, struggling cognitively to catch up, how can change happen with the scale of the disinformation that you're seeing right now?
Yeah, I think that this is the first thing that we have to do is recognize that it's real and take it extremely seriously. AI deepfakes are all over the place. We get deepfakes of our podcast all the time. We have investment group chats where an AI version of me or my co-host Scott are talking about the right stock picks and pumping these stocks and pumping these random investment theses. It's a real problem. And I think it's obviously going to become more and more of a problem the more that AI becomes technologically capable to carry that out. I'm sometimes encouraged by how young people seem to know which things are fake and which aren't. We seem to have like quite a good BS detector when it comes to AI, and we have good literacy when it comes to AI. So at the moment, I'm not worried that it's completely ruining us for the moment. But clearly the technology is going to improve, and clearly it will get to a point where it is a real problem. I would leave it to tech leaders to take that issue seriously. I don't know how we prevent it on a mass scale, but I would be in 100% agreement with you that it's a real problem. We need to take it extremely seriously.
Wonderful. Well, I've got to wind it up now, unfortunately, but this has been the most wonderful session. Ed, you've surpassed expectation by my. Thank you.